Hey my good friends, Sam Haymart for Test Driven TV. Recently I've had the chance to test drive both the 2021 Honda Ridgeline HPD and the 2021 Toyota Tacoma Trail. And so both of these trucks are pretty equally put together in terms of features as well as pricing. And so I've edited both of my test drives together right here with me in the studio so we can compare them side by side, face to face, well, and have a face-off. Now I know that this comparison might be heresy to some, right? How do you dare compare the Tacoma to a Ridgeline? The reality is that these two trucks, while similarly priced, they're similarly equipped, they're really not apples to apples. They are definitely apples to oranges. After all, Tacoma, a traditional body-on-frame pickup truck, the #1 selling in its class, and the Ridgeline, way down the list someplace as far as sales, but every bit the quality when it comes to Toyota, the reliability, the resale value, all those things are pretty equal here, but the Ridgeline, built on a unibody car crossover type of architecture, very similar to the Honda Pilot or the Honda Passport SUV, has a completely different personality, a completely different way of what it's like to live with. And that really is what separates these two trucks more than anything, how they're constructed and what the buyer who's buying the truck is looking for. So let's have a look at the two. All right, my friends, before we get out on the test drive, let's talk about what we've got here. The 2021 Honda Ridgeline Sport. This is the entry level for the Ridgeline line. And here we also have the added HPD appearance package. Now, as tested, we're at just under $41,000, $40,000 and some change. Honda gave all Ridgelines an updated styling treatment at the front end, new LED headlights, a new lower front bumper fascia that is a little bit more rugged than before, also including standard LED fog lights. This has its own special grille with the HPD package that's even more rugged, even more off-roady looking. As we come around the corner, you can see this also has black fender flares, front and rear. And when you add that to these very handsome looking 18-inch bronze colored alloys, along with tires that are now a little bit more off-road, mud, snow, well, they're chewy looking. Coming down the side and to the rear three-quarter view, a few things I want to point out. Right here you can see a seam, a nice visual break from the bed to the cab, and while the bed is not a separate structure, they've actually hung a separate piece of metal here that does allow some body flex since this is a unibody vehicle without wrinkling or stressing the body panels between the two cab and the box. At the rear you can see something they've actually added for 2021 on all Ridgelines, and that is the dual exhaust tips. Now, I like dual exhaust tips, especially on a truck. That's something that a lot of trucks are offering now. That really does sort of beef up the truck cred here, making it a little less car-like. This is the Trail based on the SR5, and as tested, this one's $41,000 and some change, got a few extra options on it. And as we look at the Trail, this has a few things that set it apart above and beyond the standard SR5, and the first thing right up front is a limited style trim grade grille. This does have halogen headlights on it. Down in the lower fascia there are fog lights. The wheels on this one are an upgrade. These are dark painted 16-inch wheels, and what's most important here is the off-road tires. Also, as we go down the side, you'll see that all of the emblems on the truck, the Tacoma, the SR5, are in satin black. From this angle you can see that we've got the 5-foot bed on our tester, and the other logos on the back in black come with the Trail trim grade. When it comes to size and dimensions, the Honda Ridgeline has a 125-inch wheelbase and a 210-inch length. The Tacoma, as tested, is slightly larger with a 127-inch wheelbase. It does need to be pointed out that you can also get the Tacoma with a 6-foot bed, which gives it a longer wheelbase and a foot longer in length. I wouldn't be a very good reviewer if I didn't point out a few things here with the cargo box on the Ridgeline. Now, this does have a traditional tailgate, just like any other truck. Now, I will point out this does not have the soft open feature like a lot of trucks do have, but it does have a few other things going for it. First of all, this is a composite lined box, which means plastic, right? So you don't have to buy a bed liner. Even though this doesn't have the traditional type of soft open, this does have a few other things going for it. this bed can actually also open like that. Now, why? Why would you have a bed that opens two different ways? The main reason is because now I can get in closer to use this trunk. Now this is a lockable trunk. You can use it with the key fob as well as the standard key. And look how deep that is. That's actually large enough to store a lot of gear in there, and it's lockable. So you can have lockable storage here in your bed without having to go to a tonneau cover. The spare tire is also in there, but one other thing to point out here is this is great to use as an ice chest out in your camping excursions. It's drainable, and I've seen it done where this thing is just full of ice and drinks. It's an awesome thing. One of the key features of the Trail Trim Grade are these lockable storage boxes here in the bed. They're made of plastic, as is the entire bed. This one on this side is insulated, this one is not. They claim you can use this one as an ice chest. Now the reality is you could use them both as an ice chest, but this one's going to keep your stuff colder longer. Now they do take up a good amount of space back here, as you can tell. If you were planning on using this to haul motorcycles or ATVs or other gear, they're going to probably get in the way, but if you're going to use this primarily for camping, this kind of thing can really come in handy. When it comes to payload capacity in these two trucks, the Honda Ridgeline has a 5'4" bed and a 1,583 pound capacity for payload. The Tacoma, quite a bit less on payload at 1,175 pounds, and it has a smaller bed actually at 5 feet. Now, as I mentioned before, it does need to be pointed out that you can option a 6-foot bed on the Tacoma, where you can't do that with the Ridgeline. Since the first time I drove the Ridgeline 5 years ago, a few things have changed, but a few things remain the same. What's changed? All-wheel drive is now standard, and the 9-speed automatic transmission that was one of the transmissions available is now the standard transmission. What hasn't changed is the 3.5-liter V6 underhood single overhead cam. It has 280 horsepower, 262 pound-feet of torque. So the question I always like to ask is, how does it go when we come to a complete stop? Nobody around? And here we go. Not bad. And 60. It has decent punch. It has a pretty nice sound too. The transmission, even though this 9-speed transmission hasn't always been my favorite in the past, they've done a lot of work to this to refine it, to make it work better. Fuel efficiency, it's rated at 18 city, 24 highway, and 21 combined. Now that's the one thing that we didn't quite get up to standard this week. In my week with it, I got 17 mpg, but I do give a little bit of deference to the fact that the AC was on all the time and that the auto start stop didn't engage because it was so hot. All right, my friends, so as we go for a drive, the first question I always like to ask is, how does it go? Yep. And 60. I'd say it goes leisurely. I mean, you know, it's kind of a relaxing acceleration drag race. All right, I'm just kind of teasing around a little bit. Under the hood here is Toyota's venerable 3.5-liter V6. It's an engine found on almost anything larger than a Camry, although this is a variation of this engine specifically tuned for this truck. It has 278 horsepower and 265 pound-feet of torque. This does come with a 6-speed automatic transmission, which is better than the old 5-speed that came with the 4-liter back in the old days. This is rated at 18 mpg city, 22 highway, and 20 mpg combined. Not bad for a mid-sized truck. I found this week, though, 17 combined is the best I could get. And that is lower, I might add, than the city rating from the EPA. It's thirsty, and that's because this engine has to work hard to get this truck going down the road. And when you do make it work hard, you do hear it. It's a noisy motor. What's under the hood of these two trucks really defines them quite a bit. While spec, horsepower, torque, not that much different here, the layout of these powertrains and the refinement, how they work and what they're about, really define these trucks quite a bit. The Ridgeline with transverse powertrain that's very similar to that of a minivan or a crossover is a lot more refined. It's sometimes more fuel efficient and definitely quieter and smoother. The Tacoma, a more traditional front engine rear drive layout with 4-wheel drive, that's more truck-like. It feels like it when you drive it, but it's going to be more robust, maybe perhaps a little bit more reliable. You can beat it to death a little bit more off-roading and things like that. That's one of the reasons why towing is a little bit better on the Tacoma. It can tow 6,400 pounds where the Ridgeline is rated at 5,000 pounds. So powertrain layout does have an effect on overall capability. Again, depends on what the driver wants. What are you looking at a truck for? Do you want to tow, or do you need something for occasional use around town that you want to be a little bit more refined and perhaps efficient? I think here the Ridgeline gets the definite nod. Here's where I think this truck really does set itself apart from all of the other body-on-frame trucks that are out there. This thing really does hold its own off-road, in the dirt, in the places you expect a truck to do well. But because the Ridgeline is a unibody constructed truck with a fully independent suspension, it gives you the driving manners, the poise, the overall handling characteristics of a car or a crossover SUV when it comes to everyday life out here in the real world. And so around town, it tends to be smoother and it feels more solid, more refined. And at speed out here on the road, it's actually pretty quiet. Very little, if any, wind noise. A lot of trucks tend to have wind noise. So when it comes to handling, I'm very impressed. This is fun to drive. It's solid, it's refined, it's all the stuff you expect in some of the better sedans and SUVs out there, only it has a truck capability. The desert washboard road is really the place I like to test any truck or crossover or SUV vehicle, because it tells me how well built this thing is. How does it handle this rhythmic vibration of the washboard surface? Does it rattle? Does it squeak? Does it shake? Do I get any shuddering in the front suspension, the steering? And the answer to that question here in the Ridgeline is no. This is actually feeling every bit as solid and well put together as some of the more expensive off-road SUVs that I've brought out here, Jeeps, trucks, other vehicles. And the difference is because of the chassis tuning and this wonderfully balanced steering, this thing's actually fun to toss around out here. I'm actually going quite a bit faster than I normally would in a lot of vehicles because this thing is just, it's so predictable and so tossable. This is a vehicle that just feels very well composed on rougher surfaces like this, so it definitely passes the washboard road test. When it comes to ride and handling, this is a chassis that's been around for quite a long time. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it's been around for a long time, since 2005 essentially, and with the 2016 redesign, it had a few tweaks to it, but it's essentially the same bones underneath. So what that means is this drives like a Toyota truck from, well, almost 20 years ago. They've done a lot of work to make it a little bit more refined. They've done a lot of work to make it a little bit quieter, but it still has a lot of the Toyota-isms that date back over a decade. Around town, though, I do find it pretty quiet, and with these larger off-road tires that come on this particular trim grade, it does tend to be a little bit more rubberized and a little bit more isolated from some of the imperfections that you find in the road. It is quiet on the highway, and especially out here in my neighborhood, it's a comfortable daily driver. This chassis does have the jitters sometimes, and the other big thing I've noticed is that in using the brakes, they tend to be a little bit tough to modulate sometimes. They don't have a lot of feeling to them, and they tend to really require a lot of effort to get this truck stopped, especially from higher speeds. And I think in part that goes to the fact that we still have drum brakes on the back axle. Really? Really? In 2021, we still have drum brakes? I will point out this is the only truck available anywhere that still has drum brakes on it. Toyota, it's time to step it up. Out here on the Desert Washboard Road is my favorite place to bring a truck or an SUV because while this isn't necessarily testing an off-road capability, this is seeing how well built this thing is, how solid is the structure, how well tuned is the suspension to absorb all the roughness that you get when you really use the truck off the pavement. And like other Toyota Tacomas I've tested in the past, what I'm finding here is that while there is a lot of hay to be made about how old this truck is, it's pretty solid. It's pretty solid. This is a chassis that's been around for a long time. It's well proven, and especially in this trim with these large off-road tires, it has good isolation from the rhythmic vibration that this washboard surface serves up. The one thing I am noticing is a little bit of jitteriness, that something that I've seen out there on the pavement, and it does tend to be amplified out here on the washboard surface, but I'm not getting rattling in the chassis, I'm not getting rattling in the steering, and most important, I'm not getting rattling in the structure or any of the interior trim. So yes, it's old, but it's solid. It's solid. Like the powertrains, handling is another area where these two vehicles could not be more different. The Ridgeline car, SUV, crossover architecture means smoother, more refined, quieter, more comfortable every day. Tacoma, truck frame, more robust, a little bit clunky, but if you need it to work, if you need it to tow, if you're going off-road, that's going to be your better choice. Again, my prism is live in the city. I don't do a lot of rough stuff. I don't tow, so the Ridgeline for me is the better choice here. It's just a much more refined driving experience, and for 99% of the people out there, it is the better of these two trucks, at least when it comes to handling. Looking at the dash, because we're in the Sport, this has a patterned plastic that looks sort of like metal, and that carries down into the console. Even though this is the base model, feature content is pretty impressive. There's climate control in the center and an 8-inch touchscreen at the top. These seats are manually controlled, both passenger and the driver, and they have this very handsome cloth. It's very sturdy. It actually looks fashionable, dare I say it. Another thing I like about these seats is they have fold-down armrests that sort of picks up the fact that I don't have a really tall console here. It's just a nice, comfortable position to lay your arms as you're making long trips or just driving around town. These seats are exceptionally comfortable, as I've come to expect from Honda. They have good side support. They're firm, but they're comfortable nonetheless. They're not over-cushioned, and the position is just right. Looking forward, the instrument cluster is a 2-dial setup with 2 separate screens in the center, colored digital information screens that you can program for whatever you want. The steering wheel itself has paddle shifters. Those control the 9-speed automatic transmission and a full suite of controls on the steering wheel. Very high quality in terms of switchgear, and that can be said throughout this interior. The center console is very simply laid out. There's a nice storage area down at the bottom for your phone and a cubby in the center of the center stack. Down on the middle of the console, the gear selector. Now this has a push-button gear selector, not my favorite, but we're in a truck, so I tend not to be as upset about it as I would be if this were a performance car. What's very cool about this is the center console storage. This actually has a roll top, and when you open that, you've got a huge, deep bin down here. There's actually room for about 4, maybe even 5 Kleenex boxes. The interior of the Tacoma Trail has a few things that set it apart from the standard SR5, and that is the cloth seating. These are unique seats with a different cloth pattern, and they have tan stitching accents. On the floor, all-weather floor liners, and also optioned on this are embroidered floor mats. The rest of this interior is essentially base SR5 trim, which means a lot of hard plastic. There are some soft trims here and there, but it is a base to mid-level Toyota pickup truck inside. One thing I have to point out is, very much like the exterior, which you find very familiar, is that this is a design that's been around for a while. This truck is basically set around the bones of the 2005 Tacoma, which, even though this is technically a different generation from that starting in 2016, the bones and a lot of the underlying structure is the same. My point, the seating position in this and a lot of the comfort and design as it relates to how you live in this vehicle is aged. This steering wheel, while it does tilt and telescope, doesn't quite have the adjustment range to go with these seats. The seating position is such that you don't quite have the adjustment range even with these power seats to kind of get into the same type of comfortable position you can get in a lot of the competitors now. As I look forward to the instrument cluster, even though it does have a digital screen in the center which allows some customization, it's a very basic decade-old design. The center stack, although it is very simple, and I do have upgrades like the climate control, I still see a lot of blank plates and things that remind me I don't have a lot of the options here. That's the kind of design ethos that most brands have thrown out the window decades ago. From behind the wheel, these two trucks again are completely different. The Ridgeline has a more modern interior, a more modern seating position. You're a little bit higher off the floor. The Tacoma, still based on sort of a 1990s architecture. You're sitting down on the floor like the old days, a little bit lower. The cab height isn't quite as high, and so it just feels older. Ridgeline, higher quality materials, better switch gear. There's just a lot of reasons why the Ridgeline has a much more refined and comfortable driving experience, at least up front. Just like the last time I test drove the Ridgeline, I find that this rear seat area does have a nice high seating position. You can see that My legs aren't perched up, and the same can't be said for almost anything this competes with. The Toyota, Ford, and Chevrolet midsize trucks, you do sit lower, and it's a little bit more of a cramped space back here. My legroom is pretty good, as you can see. These seats are set for my height, about 5'8", 5'9", depending on whether I'm wearing boots or sneakers. If I had a 6-footer up here, seat might be back a little further, my knees might be up against that seat. Now, comfort is the thing we need to talk about here. This is a pretty flat, firm seat, not a lot of side support, not a lot of holding you going on here. While it's not an unnatural position, it's not the most comfortable in either. Now, these seats, they do fold up in a 60-40 split, allowing you to put big tall boxes and other gear back here, maybe a television from the big box store, something like that. And we do have a fold down center armrest in the center. Amenities, there are AC vents back here, which is very helpful on a day like today when it's 108 degrees, but there are no power ports back here. Now, this is a base model. However, we are getting to a point in the car market 5 years after this was introduced that that's getting to be expected, even in the lesser priced models. The rear seat of the Tacoma is a pretty tight, compact space. Even though this is a mid-sized truck, we're still in compact truck land here. These seats are set for my height, about 5'8", 5'9", with my boots on. And as you can see, my knees are just touching these seats. So if I had a 6-footer sitting up here with that seat further back, I'd be in trouble. I'm almost in trouble now. And as you can see, the seating position also a little bit on the low side. My knees are perched up I just wouldn't want to sit here very long. Let me just put it that way. I'm in a position of compromise. Let's just say that. Headroom, reasonably good. I've got about 1.5 inches above my head. And as I look down in the center console, I do not have vents back here. There are no charging ports back here. This is a pretty Spartan basic place here in the back seat of this truck. Now, I will point out that these do fold up, these lower cushions, and you can see some storage bins and boxes down at the bottom. And if you fold the backs forward, there's also storage behind the seats. So they have utilized this area back here to give you storage that you need, but when it comes to comfort, we're on the low side. The main overriding power here is the fact that this is a very old truck. Its bones especially are very old, and that comes to fore in the areas of comfort, how the seating positions are laid out, especially in the back seat, and we talked about that. Well, look, the proof's in the pudding. The rear seat, too, of these two interiors does lean towards Ridgeline. You're higher off the floor, not down in a hole, much more comfortable for passengers long term. And I think it just has a more spacious appeal, and again, the higher materials. Of these two trucks, I think Ridgeline is the winner, hands down, when it comes to the interior. So now is the time when I tell you which truck is the winner. Which one's the winner? Well, I don't really want to step into that controversy too deeply, because the reality is these two trucks aren't really entirely comparable, other than to say they're both from good companies, they both have great quality, they both have good resale value, and as tested, they're priced pretty close to the same. But that's where the similarity ends. These two trucks could not be more different, and which one is the winner for you is the truck that best suits your needs. Where do you live? What do you do? What are you going to do with your truck? When I look at these two trucks, I do think the Ridgeline is the better of the two. Why? Because I live in a densely populated city. I don't use a truck that often. I just need it for occasional things, going to Home Depot for some things, or buying a big TV from the big box store, whatever it might be. Maybe buy some plants and some manure for the yard. I don't tow. I don't do a lot of off-roading except when I'm in press vehicles and it's fun. So I don't need a truck that makes me pay for daily refinement, comfort, and efficiency to have all that capability. Some people need that, right? If you haul, you work in the trades, you have a boat, those are things that make it worth putting up with a little bit of a lack of refinement, lack of efficiency, lack of whatever it is that body-on-frame truck brings. And I'm not bagging on the Toyota in that way. All body-on-frame trucks come at a cost. They're just not as comfortable and refined as most cars. And so that's where the Ridgeline really has an edge in this market. Against these two, Toyota has the edge if you need all that stuff. So there you go. That is my answer. I will tell you though, the Ridgeline did make our I'd Buy It list this year. The Toyota Tacoma did not. And that's not just because of my needs personally, but because of some other measurements that you can see in those individual videos, which are linked down below. So if you do like the video you just saw and you're not mad at me now, click right there, see our latest one or best yet. Click right there and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Either way, stay tuned.